At first glance, Devil's Island looks like paradise. Dotted with palm trees and surrounded by sparkling waters, its beauty belies a horrific truth. For nearly 100 years, tens of thousands of men perished on its shores while living in a French penal colony. From 1852 to 1953, the inmates of France's infamous Devil's Island penal colony in the Caribbean died en masse from malnutrition, disease, and futile escape attempts. Their crimes ranged from offending Napoleon III to murder. But some, like French soldier Alfred Dreyfus, hadn't done anything at all. Nevertheless, they all suffered equally. The men imprisoned at Devil's Island endured rampant diseases, malnutrition, and mistreatment by guards. Few of the inmates ever returned to France. Before becoming a penal colony, Devil's Island was seen as a place of salvation. In the 1760s, French settlers decimated by yellow fever sought refuge on the trio of islands 8 miles off the shore of French Guiana. They named them Isle Royale for their king, Isle Saint Joseph for the protection of a saint, and Isle du Diable because of the shark-infested waters. They dubbed the small archipelago the Salvation Islands. But 100 years later, French Emperor Napoleon III tapped the Isles du Salut to serve a different purpose: to hold prisoners. Napoleon III sought to solve several problems with Devil's Island. First, he wanted to rid himself of anyone who had opposed his coup d'état in December of 1851. He sent prisoners to Devil's Island just days after seizing power, including 239 Republicans who had resisted his power grab. However, Napoleon III didn't send prisoners to Devil's Island merely out of spite. The penal colony had many other advantages to the French government as well. First, it would remove dangerous criminals from the country. Second, the convicts could help jumpstart the lagging colonization of French Guiana. And finally, they provided inexpensive labor as a replacement to the enslaved population in the colony, which France had freed in 1848. Soon, ships full of prisoners set sail toward the penal colony on Devil's Island. Before arriving at Devil's Island, prisoners first had to survive crossing the Atlantic. Not all did. The men were locked in cages together and often broke out into fights which left one or more dead. Upon arrival, some 40% of the prisoners did not even survive their first year. They died, one, by rampant diseases and lack of food. As if that weren't enough, prisoners also endured cruel treatment from their guards. Housed in tiny, dark cells, they were forbidden from talking, reading, or even sitting before nightfall. Guards patrolled along a grid-like ceiling so that they could look down into the cells. Before long, the penal colony was known as the Dry Guillotine because of its high mortality rate. However, even if someone did survive the crossing and the conditions on Devil's Island, they likely never went back to France. Under the policy of doublage, convicts couldn't leave French Guiana once they finished their punishment. Instead, they had to remain for a period equal to their original sentence, and anyone with a sentence of more than 8 years was exiled for life. Of the tens of thousands of men who served time on Devil's Island, one stands out: Alfred Dreyfus. In 1894, the French government convicted Dreyfus, who was a young military officer, of treason. Dreyfus protested his innocence. He had been charged with giving military secrets to the Germans, but his handwriting didn't even match the evidence presented at court. Indeed, at a time when French national loyalty still hinged on being Catholic, Dreyfus had been convicted based on being Jewish more than anything else. The government condemned Dreyfus to a life sentence on Devil's Island. For 4 long years, Dreyfus endured a torturous existence on Devil's Island. Living in an isolated cabin on the Isle du Diable, Dreyfus was shackled to his bed, fed rancid pork, and was forbidden from speaking with other prisoners. But back in France, the tide had begun to turn in his favor. In an open letter entitled J'accuse, French author Émile Zola accused the French government of framing Dreyfus in a massive cover-up. And, eventually, the French government relented. They offered Dreyfus a pardon in 1899. he accepted even though it meant an acknowledgement of guilt. However, the French government fully exonerated Dreyfus in 1906. Another of Devil Island's most famous prisoners is Henri Charrière, who was a former Parisian gangster. He was sent to Devil's Island in 1931. Although he maintained his innocence, Charrière was convicted of murdering a pimp and sentenced to life in prison. But he started plotting his escape as soon as he arrived. 3 years into his sentence, he launched his first escape attempt. Impressively, Charrière made it off the island, but French authorities quickly caught up to him. As a consequence of his escape attempt, he was sentenced to 2 years of solitary confinement. Undeterred, he tried to escape 7 more times. Others might have given up, but not Charrière. On the 8th attempt, he managed to flee by building a raft out of coconuts. He navigated the shark-infested waters to Venezuela. There, he settled down, had a family, and wrote an explosive book entitled Papillon, about his time on Devil's Island. The French government officially pardoned him in 1970, and Hollywood later turned his book into the 1973 movie of the same name starring Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman. But by the time Charrière tossed his coconut raft in the water, Devil Island's days were numbered. Horror stories had drifted across the ocean. The French government officially stopped sending prisoners to the island in 1938, but World War II would interrupt its complete closure, and a few more would arrive until 1946. It wasn't until 1953 that the last prisoners still held at Devil's Island left for good. In its 100 years of operation, Devil's Island had imprisoned approximately 80,000 men. Tens of thousands of them died there. Prison officials tossed many of their corpses in the water, ringing a bell that alerted the sharks to swarm and feast. Today, the dazzling sun above Devil's Island obscures the horrors that took place. But it cannot entirely erase them. Visitors will find prison ruins in the jungle. Like a scar on the land, their barred windows, rusted manacles, and stone cots serve as a stoic reminder. Once, this slice of paradise held true horrors.